to Anything But Ordinary with Spooky and Raven. Tonight, our topic is Plum Island and other biolabs. My name is Spooky, and here is your other most awesome host, Raven.
Hey, that was a nice compliment.
That was a whole lot better than what I said at rehearsal.
Yeah, or any other day. No, I'm just kidding. So, how are you?
No, there was really no rehearsal, but we always talk before the show.
Yes, we do. Prepare. So, how are you?
I'm doing good. I'm cold. We got a snow blizzard moving in, so we'll probably just get about a dusting of an inch, maybe two.
Hopefully, nothing too bad. We've been chilly up here too. So, um, tonight's topic, initially we were gonna do like Plum Island and Denver Airport, a two-parter show, but after me and you kind of studied it and looked into it, we both realized that they should both have their own 2-hour show because they're extremely in-depth topics.
Oh, I know. There was no way that we would get either one of them in only an hour. And, like this is just a 2 hour show. So we decided to split them up. Tonight we're going to do Plum Island, and next week we're going to do the Denver International Airport.
Yeah, and they were both topics that were requested from a couple of YouTube viewers, and
Right.
so we finally got around to it for them. So thank you for, asking for certain topics for us to cover. We appreciate that, and we welcome
Yeah,
anybody to
we
send suggestions and what have you as
right.
well.
We do read your messages, and we do when any of our listeners make a suggestion, we do take it seriously. And but we have so much that we could talk about. Sometimes it takes us a little bit to get to it.
Right. Now, tonight when we were kind of looking into Plum Island or whatever, and I started reading about it, and I realized how deep this web goes and how there's, Plum Island isn't the only thing that people should be concerned about. I mean, that's not the only, you know, bioweapons research lab people should be worried about because they basically have them scattered throughout our whole country.
Just about every state, not all the states, but just about every state has one of these labs.
Or more than one. Some places
Yeah,
have
some of them
several.
have more than one.
Right.
So
And they
it
and they go on ratings between 1 to 4 and 5, and 1 being, the lowest, you don't have to worry too much, but once you go to 2, 3, 4 and 5, you're basically high risk and it's completely danger. So
yeah, those are absolute dangerous, but don't take us wrong. Every one of these labs are dangerous.
right. So after me and you got to talking, we thought, well, we really need to kind of bring it to attention and talk a little bit about this. I know
Oh,
there's
there,
people out there who already know this stuff, but there are people out there that have no idea, kind of like some of the things that we didn't know about until we started researching this and found out about
well,
it. So,
I knew about Plum Island,
well, yeah,
but
everybody.
I didn't know the extent of all of this until I really got to digging into it. So it really, really surprised me. It just showed me how unaware of it I was.
Right, and then as we started to explore it and then, had our eyes open to everything else that's out there. So we thought, we'd just share it with you guys. And after the show tonight, we do have it up on podcast. I'm going to have all the reference links and to everything that we kind of talk about tonight so you guys can go and explore it yourself. I mean, we're not here to tell anybody what to believe or what not to believe or what, follow what we say or anything. We're going to throw it out there and
And let you research it for yourselves.
yeah, and find out what's 100% true or what's not, but we just thought it'd be kind of a cool thing to bring up. So why don't you
Exactly.
kind of give a
Well,
brief description about the
well,
history of Plum Island for those people who may not be aware of it at all?
okay. Well, Plum Island, of course, is an island, and it's located in Gardiner's Bay, east of Orient Point, off the eastern coast of Long Island Sound, Long Island, New York. It is 3 miles long, and it's 1 mile wide at its widest point. It was first owned by the Korchog and Montaukett Indian tribes and later sold to Samuel Willis for, get this, for a coat, a barrel of biscuits, and 100 fish hooks. That was cheap.
Okay, I guess we had our volume down was a little bit. I don't know how it shot down on us, but we had it all checked. But hopefully it should be back right now. But um, Can you say the last line, what you just said? Because I guess some people said you were a little quiet, so I just fixed it.
Okay. Do you want me to start over or just the last thing I said?
Uh, just start it over.
Okay.
Sorry about that, guys. I just fixed it. I found the volume thing got shot down. I have no idea how that happened. So we're not
Sometimes that happens
professionals.
to
We're
us.
just two random friends who like to talk about things.
Okay. Plum Island is, of course, an island. It's located in Gardiner's Bay, east of Orient Point, off the eastern coast of Long Island Sound, out by Long Island, New York. It's 3 miles long and 1 mile wide at its widest point. It was first owned by the Korchog and Montaukett Indian tribes, and it was later sold to Samuel Willis for a coat, a barrel of biscuits, and 100 fish hooks.
You know, back then, I don't think, because as far as Native Americans believed in stuff like that, and I think what they were initially doing was because their belief system is that nobody owns the land. It belongs to
Right.
everybody. So what I think they were initially doing is they were selling the Europeans access rights for fishing and hunting, but they took it, it was like cultural differences, and they didn't, understand 100% of what the transaction is. So they got in a lot of feuds over this island, actually. The three different tribes did with that Samuel Wiles. But he ended up selling it to somebody else, too, didn't he?
Yeah, he ended up selling to a Abraham S. Hewitt, but it's also the site of Fort Terry, which is a coastal fortification on Plum Island, which was supposed to protect the commercially vital Long Island Sound. The original fort was constructed after the federal government acquired Plum Island from Abraham S. Hewitt for $25,000, and the fort began operation in 1897. Now, the initial purchase was for 150 acres, but the rest of the island was turned over to the federal government in 1901. In April of 1952, it served as a U.S. Army Chemical Corps facility. Now, the Chemical Corps is a branch of the United States Army that is tasked with defending against chemical, biological, radiological,
Yeah, that's a
and nuclear
mouthful.
weapons.
Yeah,
I knew I was going to screw that word up.
right.
Fort Terry was small and it focused on anti animal biological warfare research at enemy livestock. And what this means is they were going to infect the enemy's livestock, food animals, with these bacteria and viruses. So when they consumed them,
Hmm.
they would get these diseases and die.
Well, we know it was a little bit more than that's not the only reason why they were doing
Well,
this,
that's
but
not the only
that's what they
reason, no.
used to say. Yeah.
Now, the United States Department of Agriculture took over the island in 1954 and began to use it as an animal disease research facility. Most of the disease research done by the USDA was also focused on biological warfare until 1969 when Richard Nixon ended the U.S. bioweapons program.
Right. But even though he ended that, I mean, the facility continued to operate anyway under the
Right,
USDA until.
right. It continued to operate under the USDA until June of
Yeah. Well,
2003.
yeah, I know because it's but after that, that's when I think when the responsibility of Plum Island and its security was basically transferred over to the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. You know what I mean?
Oh, I know. And doesn't that thought make you feel nice and warm and safe
I think it's
inside?
kind of interesting, though, when we were reading into this, they happened to end up taking over after certain requests were asked, and we'll talk about those requests later on when we're giving a little bit more detail of these secretive things that were going on, because even I wasn't aware of a lot of this stuff. And we're not going to be able to name everything that took place or a lot of stuff that's out there. It is on the internet for people to find because we only have 2 hours to talk about all this stuff. But
So a lot of things that went on there, we just cannot include in the show because we just do not have the time.
right, but we do have a big chunk of it that we're going to be talking about. But I mean, since 1954, you know, they claim the whole goal of it was to protect Americans' livestock from animal diseases. So that's why they were creating these things and looking into it. You know what I mean? But
Right.
wasn't it like during the Cold War? It was a secret biological weapons program. Is like what you were saying, to target other
That was
countries'
targeting,
stuff.
right.
Yeah, but that building 257 or lab 257, that's a huge thing. Or is a huge
Oh yeah.
U.S. biological warfare research
That
laboratory.
was that was the main building on the island.
Right, and it was in, you know, the facility's research in anti-animal biology, biological agents or whatever. You know, you said that started in 52 or
Yeah.
54. Yeah.
54. 1954, that's when they began to use it as an animal disease research facility.
Dessert. Yeah.
Dessert.
Yeah.
Animal dessert, son of a gun.
We have so much that we're going to be reading tonight, so we're going to be like, oh. But
I just
according to
had
the
a nice turkey dinner. Bring me a big old steak for dessert.
yeah, well, according to the Department of Homeland Security, the building 257 was closed down in 1995, and it poses no health hazard issues, which we all
Now,
know is bull.
now that is
The whole island
the
is a
whole
threat.
island is contaminated.
Yeah.
The whole island is contaminated, and this is the thing. The U.S. government is considering selling this island, and the island is contaminated. I think I read somewhere that there's not even wild animals that even live on that island anymore.
Well, some of the things that we're going to be mentioning about too, as we were just giving a brief little history about it, but and you know, certain scientists who worked on it will be talking about that. But even in recency, people don't go fishing around there because there's no lobster, and a lot of the fish have died off there. You know, so it's
Right.
people are getting
And
infected all the way around.
and
anyway.
actually right now Plum Island doesn't really exist anymore, the facility, because they spent over $1 billion moving this place to Manhattan, Kansas, which was really great. Put it right in the middle of the heartland.
That's not the only one there, and we mention that later. But the fact is that they're moving that into like Tornado Alley, and they're actually changing it from a BSL 4 research facility into a 5, which makes it even more extremely dangerous than it already
Exactly.
is. And we're going to be mentioning several of the accidents that we found off of legitimate government websites and the CDC websites, and we're going to kind of read off some of the things that people have been exposed to that people had no idea that happened, because you don't see it on the news. They don't talk about it, you know?
Well, one guy that worked there, Dr. Eric Traub,
The Nazi, yeah.
the Nazi, he came to the United States through Project Paperclip. Now, nearing the end of World War II, the United States and Russia raced to recruit these German scientists for post-war purposes. And under a top secret program with the code name Project Paperclip, the United States pursued Nazi scientists. And Dr. Traub was one of them. And they were bringing them to America under work contracts and offering them full United States citizenship.
Yep, and a paid job. And a lot of them were pardoned for their war crimes. I mean, they were.
I know, they were
under,
pardoned.
They worked under some serious Nazi. I forgot his name. It's on the picture.
No, no one lives there.
That we know of.
That we know of. The island is supposed to be deserted, but curiously, it's still guarded. And if you get close to it, you are persuaded by armed military to leave the area.
Persuaded is a nice way to say it, but
yeah, really. But the military recruited more than 2,000 scientists, and many of them had dark Nazi party past. Dr. Traub did study in the United States before the war,
Yep.
at the Rockefeller Institute. Um,
I like how you said
he,
fella.
yeah, Rockefeller,
Right, yeah, you said.
Rockabilly, who
Yeah.
knows? Dr. Traub was a biological chemical warfare scientist, and he worked secretly with the Naval Medical Research Institute, the CIA, and the Army.
Mm-hmm.
And he's also known as the father who founded USDA's Plum Island Research Lab, located only 6 miles from Old Lyme, Connecticut.
Now here's the thing. They call it, Project Paperclip, and they rescued 2,000 Nazi scientists, whatever. It was Russia and America, our forces that were trying to get these top scientists because they wanted that information of the biological weapons that they were already doing and been doing for a long time. So Russia and American troops were racing after trying to capture them, and of course a lot
And
of them
they
a
took
lot
these
of them went, with the American ones because they had done so many awful experiments as it was previously on a bunch of the Russians. That's one of the things I was reading about.
Well, they did.
But
They
this
did
guy was a sick
experiments on
man.
Russians, on gypsies, on Jews, on all these people,
Well, yeah.
and they were recruited and given a full pardon and full citizenship.
The
If
funny
they
thing is he was already studying here in the States before the war, and then was basically funded by the Nazi Americans that we already have here, and a bunch of people
Right.
already kind of know who the families are: Rockefellers, the DuPonts, and so and so and so. We've already talked about them before on our other conspiracy shows with the JFK stuff. But on this picture, you guys, it kind of gives a little detail, a little bit about him and the things that he was doing. But he was experimenting with ticks and all that stuff
Yes, it
inside the
was.
facility,
Well, Plum Island is home to a excuse me. Plum Island is home to a biosafety level 4. That's a BSL 4 research facility.
Mm-hmm.
And the only comparable government facilities in the country,
Well, not anymore. A few.
well,
of
not
them.
anymore, but at the time,
Right.
were the U.S. Army laboratories at Fort Detrick, Maryland, and the Centers for Disease Control in Atlanta, Georgia.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Plum Island was specifically engaged in the study of zoonotics.
Yeah.
Now, zoonotic diseases are diseases that can be transmitted from animals to humans, like West Nile, Lyme disease, Ebola, and etc.
Yeah. Well, in 1999, that Floyd. Now I'm turning into you.
Fled.
Floyd Horn. He was administrator of the Agriculture Research Service. Now, he persuaded President Clinton at the time to include Plum Island in his expanded bioterrorism program, based solely on the possibility of a biological attack on the nation's agricultural base. And, basically in the last year of that administration of the island's research facility is when it was transferred into the USDA, Department of Homeland Security. And that's what I was kind of stating before. All of a sudden, this guy asks Clinton to be able to allow them to expand their bioterrorism program, and then that's when Homeland
Didn't
takes
Clinton
over.
grant that?
Huh? Yeah. And then
Yeah,
all
Clinton
of a sudden,
granted that.
yeah,
Yeah.
after he grants it, then all of a sudden, Department of Homeland Security takes over after they get the green light to go ahead and do even worse things on this island.
Yeah. Well, employees didn't live on the island.
No.
They commuted from their homes in like Connecticut and Long Island,
Mm-hmm.
and the facility was only accessible by government ferry. Doesn't that sound familiar? Can you say Area 51? That's the way they transported their employees.
Not
But
in a
that's
boat, in a plane,
not
though.
a boat, but it was a private government transport.
Right. I'd like to see a boat go across the desert.
But Area 51's another show.
That's not. Yeah.
The diseases being researched don't all live in test tubes or petri dishes.
Mm-mm.
There are quite a number of there was quite a number of infected live animals for study there.
Yeah, I mean they were
And
outside the buildings.
yeah, roaming the grounds.
Right.
And some of these diseases have an incubation period extending for days.
Mm-hmm.
And what that means is that it was entirely possible for a researcher to be unknowingly infected on Friday
Mm-hmm.
and spend Saturday and Sunday spreading some hideous plague to the public on the mainland.
Yeah. I mean, the government claims that there's only been one outbreak on the island, which people are talking about was the foot and mouth in 1978, and they claim they contained it by killing all the livestock. But, I mean, they further maintain that there has never been a leak to the mainland, but we already found out that there wasn't. But apparently, the first appearance of what they call that Lyme disease.
Yeah, that the
basically
outbreak of Lyme disease was just 13 miles northeast of the facility.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
and it covered.
Of course, that's only a coincidence,
Mm-hmm.
just as the mysterious yet still unexplained appearance of the West Nile virus in both Long Island and New York City.
Mm-hmm.
Those were coincidences also.
Yeah, it didn't come from there though. Even though the funny thing is now that I was reading all this stuff on CDC and everything else, is they can actually track back that disease and that virus to what lab it came from. And we mentioned this later on when we continue the show, mentioning certain things when we're talking about the other facilities, that a lot of these things are tracked back to our own United States facility things, and that they did let the stuff out. But if they have the animals outside and they're infected, you don't think mosquitoes are coming by and ticks and birds and
people don't realize
stuff.
that mosquitoes carry all kinds of diseases. They land on an animal, they suck their blood, they go and land on a person, and they bite them. I mean, you cannot believe some of the things that mosquitoes carry. But in the book,
mm-hmm. Go on. Sorry about that.
Belarus, Belarus Secret,
mm-hmm.
By author John Loftus.
Mm-hmm.
He was the Justice Department employee who exposed Kurt Waldheim as Nazi.
As a Nazi? Yeah.
As a Nazi. He states that Nazi germ warfare scientists had experimented with poison ticks dropped from planes to spread rare diseases.
Mm-hmm.
And he also states that he had received information that the United States had tested some of these poison ticks on
Plum Island? Yeah.
The Plum Island artillery range off the coast of Connecticut during the early part of the 1950s.
Right. Now, see, when I was researching about Lyme disease and all that stuff, I mean, I really, really, really looked, okay, because I wanted to see where it originally came from, how long it's been around. And they claimed, well, it was around a long time ago, but there hadn't been any outbreaks or anything, not until, in our country, not until the 70s, right? Now, there's another book, I think it was called Lab 257, and Michael Carroll, he talks a lot about this stuff, and we're going to also suggest people to check that book out as well as some other things we'll bring up in a little bit. But he was talking about, he was talking to this one guy, I think was the director. His name was,
Jerry Callis.
Yeah, thank you. He was saying that on Plum Island they experimented with ticks, but he claimed they never were outside of the containment. And they said that they did have a tick colony where you take them and feed them on certain viruses and breed the ticks to see how many generations it would last on and on until it was diluted. Well, they said recently they reinstated the tick colony. Well, this Michael Carroll, who writes the book Lab 257, also kind of cites additionally that there's, in 1978, the U.S. use of ticks as a bio-war vectors on Plum Island. Oh man, I lost my thought for a second. But they were using like the lone star tick, and that wood tick is not from New York and Connecticut and all those areas. It comes from Texas. Okay, so how did a Texas infected tick end up out east? And it was harboring, and they were also talking about they were infecting certain ticks, but they brought those ticks to Plum Island, and what they were doing is saying they were infecting them with the African swine fever virus or whatever saying.
Yeah.
But when they had issues with that and they had an outbreak with the swine fever tick study, that's when it was about the 70s when all of a sudden the Lyme disease outbreak started to show
Right.
up in all the neighboring
One more
areas.
thing on the Lone Star tick.
Mm-hmm.
That particular tick, like you say, was in Texas, and now it is. Oh, I lost my thought.
It's basically how did it migrate from Texas to New
Oh, it's
York
up.
and Connecticut and all that stuff?
It's yeah. Now, New Jersey, New York, and Connecticut all have these Lone Star ticks.
Right.
How did they get there?
Even though the tick's range is only limited to Texas, period. I mean, they don't go that far. The fact is that Plum Island has, and some of the people have admitted that they were working on these things. And when they were having the issues with the African swine fever virus and the outbreak a little bit with that, where they lost containment of handling it, is all of a sudden when Lyme disease showed up in the other
Right.
places, and they were working with that stuff. And if you guys go and look up about the Lyme disease stuff, you can see the radius, where the most outbreaks started from and how bad they are. It's all circling around Plum Island.
And Carol also cites that Dr. Traub as having worked with the U.S. Army, the Navy, and the Central Intelligence Agency, the CIA,
Mm-hmm.
and the USDA before he returned to Germany in 1953. He's also known to have visited Plum Island on at least 3 different occasions and was offered the directorship there several times.
Yeah, you're right. Mm-hmm. But I think I can't remember. Didn't he like turn part of it down and then some other guy picked it up?
Yeah. Oh, I can't.
I think it was like
That guy's name
Dr.
escapes me.
Andrus or whatever. He was I think he was
Right,
like
Andrus.
entomologist or something. I can't even say that word, but I think that's what he
Well,
was. But he was
it,
reported to have uh, nurtured basically took care of over 200,000 soft and hard ticks, varying of different species.
right.
You know what I mean? So they were
Right.
continuing on with seeing what
So
kind of
actually,
bacteria
they're
and
the ones
viruses
that
these
took,
things could.
yeah, so actually, they're the ones that took these ticks out of their natural states and habitats and countries,
Mm-hmm.
and now they
Infecting
are
them.
infecting them, and now these ticks are in the United States and they're
Right.
not contained
And the
anymore.
first known tick issue as far as Lyme disease started up in the 70s, which coincides
Right.
with the
Just
issues that they were
13 mi
having.
yeah, just 13 miles from Plum Island.
Mm-hmm.
In 1978, the first that was the first United States outbreak of foot and mouth disease since 1929.
And it occurred on
And
Plum Island, yep.
and it occurred on Plum Island. Now, the government claims that it was contained and it never left the island. Animals being held outside the containment area for future research, for they were inexplicable. They were infected.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not even going to try that word. Only the island location of the outbreak prevented it from being
Spread
spread
to
to
the
the
mainland,
mainland,
right. That,
causing devastating
right,
economic coincidences.
right,
And for anybody that don't know, foot and mouth disease, it's also called hoof and mouth disease. It's an infectious and sometimes fatal viral disease that affects cloven hoofed animals, both domestic and wild.
right,
And it can be transmitted from animal to human.
right.
Like in animals, it causes a high fever for like 2 or 3 days, and with blisters in the mouth and on the feet. And the blisters, if they rupture, they can cause lameness. In humans, the symptoms include malaise, fever, vomiting, red
Yeah.
ulcerated
Well,
lesions of the oral
right.
tissues, and sometimes small blisters on the skin.
That's not the only accident they had, though. There's several of them that have occurred that we've tracked down. I'm sure there's more.
Right, but that just happens to be one that they did admit to, but they claim that it never left the island.
Mm-hmm.
In 1991, this is something else too. Um, Plum Island was not prepared for hurricanes.
Mm-mm.
In 1991, Hurricane Bob shut down all electrical power at Plum Island for 18 hours.
Yeah,
And
18,
it is
not an
18.
hour. 18
And it
hours.
disabled the negative air pressure, which was vital to containment, and other protective systems in a biological meltdown.
Right. Now, we were looking this up and we were reading the actual documentations. Now, here I have up is the government public meeting of the bio leak at Plum Island, August 1991. Now, I have the link on the picture. I'll also post it up later on our website so you guys can go and read it yourself. But on page 85 and 86 on the DHS evening session on 7/29/08 at High Tower Reporting Service, the U.S. Department of Homeland Security National Bio and Agro Defense Facility Draft Environmental Impact Statement, the NBAF Draft EIS, public meeting date July 24th of 2008, 1:30 p.m. Grand Hyatt, Washington, in Washington, D.C. Now it says, and the following, in August of 1991, Hurricane Bob hit Plum Island and knocked over the overhead power box, which was the backup power for the facility. And as a, I almost started talking Boston there. As a consequence, the freezers containing the virus samples defrosted the air seals on the lab, which were breached in the animal holding facilities where the vents failed. The fail safety mechanism of the air damper sealing off the facility to the open air also failed, meaning all these viruses and everything were exposed to open air into the, blowing in from the storm to into the, other areas. Now, it melted virus samples mixed with infected animal waste on the floor, and swarms of mosquitoes filled the facility. This took place in what the USDA called the safest facility in the world. In 1991, in September, the USDA denied that any system failures had occurred during the hurricane, and the lab workers that were occupying the lab at the time of the blackout were fired. Go figure, right?
Go figure.
Yeah. In 1992, OSHA and the EPA cited the Plum Island facility with hundreds of now check this out. They were cited with well over hundreds of safety violations, and OSHA returned 5 years later and found that the violations had not been corrected even to that day. That's 5 years later after the storm. And at that time, only 124 new violations were found. And in 2000 July, the New York State Department of Environment Conservation found very troubling hazardous waste violations also at Plum Island's facility, prompting that New York State Attorney General to sue the USDA. And in July of 2001, a court-approved consent ordered forced the USDA to omit serious discharge violations. So basically what they're saying is, in this storm, it knocked everything out. So all the insane viruses that they have there, from West Nile to Ebola to anthrax to everything else, it was just basically opened up and escaped into free air that during the storm flown into the rest of the areas. You know what I mean? As well as mosquitoes carrying all this stuff. And that's just that one instance, but when they were in there, they were being cited for several other hundreds of things and violations that they had other years, And you guys can look this up on the DHS government website and read it for yourself, that we're not making this up. It's out there. But I felt like, why don't they report this? Why hadn't it been on the news, especially for people in New York and New Jersey,
Well, also, like September 11th, 2001, researchers at Plum Island, Detrick, Maryland, and the CDC evacuated their facilities. Propagandists later denied that the facility is any risk from a terrorist attack, but yet they evacuated this island.
I know, right?
Right, and then
they abandoned it.
They abandoned it. They just abandoned
kept guarding it.
In 2002, unionized Plum Island workers went on strike, and they were replaced with temporary replacement workers. And one of the replacement workers, a computer technician with an arrest record, he went AWOL with a laptop capable of controlling air pressure from a remote location.
Right.
And then
there's a lot more that happened in 2002 during that strike as well.
Right.
But we encourage people to go and research that up and really look into it, because there were some serious things that went down with that as well. And they had temporary workers in there that they were also some foreigners, So who knows what
Right.
they were, because they said they were missing things and things were taken from off the
Right.
island as well.
Right. Well, in December of 2002, two separate power failures occurred,
Mm-hmm.
and the first lasted for 3 hours, and that one included all three backup generators.
Mm-hmm.
Then in February of 2004, um, in his book Lab 257, Michael Carroll chronicles the numerous safety breakdowns at Plum Island and suggests that the facility may have accidentally introduced Lyme disease, West Nile virus, into the United States.
Right, and that's in 2004. Right, so yeah.
Right. In the summer of 2004, Department of Homeland Security conceals information about two internal
Foot and mouth.
um,
Yeah.
foot and mouth disease outbreaks at Plum Island until an anonymous tip alerted a reporter.
Right. Well, Plum Island isn't the only bioweapons research facility and lab
Right.
out there. Now,
Oh, also,
that's
before we
been.
get into that,
Oh, yeah. Oh,
uh,
yeah. You're right.
in July of 2008,
Yep, I forgot about
now
that one.
this one is well known. In July of 2008, the carcass of an unknown and deformed animal washed ashore near Montauk, New York.
Mm-hmm.
It was later referred to as the Montauk Monster. The residents speculated it came from nearby Plum Island, which was basically just right there across the bay. And while nothing could be proven as to what it was or where it came from, the carcass mysteriously disappeared.
Right.
And that's not the only strange or deformed animal carcass that washed ashore in that region.
Right. I mean, it happened in New Jersey and a couple other places. And now there's a website called montaukmonsters.com where people are posting all their pictures that they were getting through those years of these bizarre animals washing up on shore. There's people sharing their comments and talking about all this stuff. But didn't some of the bodies just disappear after they were reported?
Yeah, these animal carcasses would get reported. Somebody would take a picture, but they would all mysteriously disappear. And my personal opinion is that the authorities came in, removed it, got it out of sight. It's like the old saying, out of sight, out of mind.
Yeah, the black men or whatever, the black
The
men
men in black.
suits. Yeah, yeah. I didn't mean color. I apologize. It came out wrong, but I was talking about suits. But some of these photos, I mean, they have other photos. You can go and check them out. But the one that kind of looks like a pig, I mean, they have photos of it rolled over and everything, and it doesn't have hoofs or anything. It has like finger things, hands. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
These things don't match up with anything really out there. It's almost, I mean, they did talk about them, Plum Island, experimenting on
Right.
animals and humans, because I guess a
Right.
body washed up on shore too that had elongated fingers and whatnot and had bizarre disformities to it as well.
The Montauk animal,
Mm-hmm.
for example. Okay, the explanations given on that was it was a dog or it was a raccoon, and the reason it looked the way it did is because it was in the water, and the skin shrunk and made it look deformed. The problem is the people giving these explanations were people that worked at Plum Island.
Mm-hmm. Well, they can't. They'll get killed if they open
Right.
their mouths. I mean, that's with any industry. It goes with doctors and pharmaceuticals and
Right.
insurance companies.
These are people that are
scientists
paid
to be quiet.
to be quiet.
Mhm.
Exactly.
I just think it's really bizarre because it's not just one, but there were several different ones washing up the
I know.
shore along the
Montauk
East
was
Coast.
not the only one. It's just the better known one.
Right. I mean, we don't know what they are, but there's people who know animals, veterinarians and everybody who study animals, and if they would have had the bodies, they could have done a thorough investigation on exactly
Well, it was
what
almost
they were.
like it was almost like they were splitting genes.
Right.
Introducing or trying to make a new species of animal or something.
What? Yeah. Well, even
who knows,
Hitler
they
did
may
that.
have.
Even Hitler was trying to do that back in the
Right.
day because he was trying to create the super soldier. But that's another
yeah.
topic.
That's another topic.
Another show. But yeah, I totally forgot about that. It was in June of 2008. That's another issue of the lab having some of their things leak out into the public again, Because there's nowhere else Where would all these come from? But Plum Island. They're surrounding this little
Right.
area, as well as the fact that all these people were getting sick with West Nile, Lyme's disease, and everything else that they were supposedly had contained on the island. And it never leaked
Right.
out, even though there's documentations that we found, and I just read out of it, that they didn't have it contained, and they have several violations. There are people who are talking about there's sewage stuff leaking into the ocean, which is
Mm-hmm.
why people can't even fish around there anymore. They talk about open canisters that are leaking on the island of who knows
Right.
what. It's just a big
A big
mess.
mess.
And one of our chatters said, well, they should just blow it up and just get rid of it. But blowing
They
it up,
can't do that.
but even if you
They
blow
can't.
it up, you'd probably be spreading it even further into
Right.
things.
Because, like I said before, the island is still contaminated. And it's like Raven started to say, Plum Island isn't the only bioweapons research facility out there.
No, it's not. And there's several of them all over the stinking states. I mean,
All over the country.
right, Plum Island isn't the only bio research facility or lab that's been prone to accidents as well, resulting in serious pathogens escaping out into the public. I mean, there's well over 1,400 high-risk germ labs around the country. Now, you can see in this little map thing that I popped up, it's kind of, I mean, I don't have it in the exact area of the state, but I do have them in the state as much as I best that I could track down and find, and I encourage people to go and look, because, I mean, you should be aware of what's in your own backyard, and what kind of testings or things that they're doing on. And they're actually doing open air testings. They're doing all these different type facilities and things like that, and it's just messed up. You know, there's no reason why we should have these BS labs or biosafety labs, like several of them. I mean, look at Texas. I think they had over like 7 or 8 of them.
Right.
And they're all
But
exposed to having issues. I mean, BS labs or biosafety labs have been built all over the United States and around the world, and they're for certain purposes. And a majority of these BS labs have been purposely placed in large populated areas. Now, regardless if they're 1 through 4, a bias or BS labs are a major health risk to the general public, simply based on the fact that they house deadly pathogens, and suspicious quote-unquote accidents tend to occur at these facilities on a regular basis. I mean, should it be a bioterror pandemic, or if it's like, the high likely that a BSL lab will serve as the original source of the reason why that deadly pathogen leaked out. I mean, according to even USA Today show, I mean, taken from government reports that they've obtained just in August of 2014, they stated that more than 1,100 laboratory incidents involving bacteria, viruses, and toxins have been exposed significantly, to people in the agriculture. Just through, and they had several of, federal regulated issues just through 2008 and 2012. So you have no idea if one of those labs in your area had like 15 accidental leaks,
right. Well, okay, in May of
because they don't talk
2014,
about it on the news.
in May of 2014, this year, scientists wearing spacesuit-like protective gear
Mm-hmm.
searched for hours for a mouse infected with a virus similar to Ebola.
Where's that at?
It had escaped inside the Rocky Mountain laboratories in Montana,
Psh.
one of the government's highest security research facilities. I mean, this place is supposed to be a place that you just cannot get into without clearance.
And yet they got mice running around with Ebola and
And the
escaping
same
through
month,
stuff.
and the same month, and this one pisses me off
Oh, just get mad.
because, sorry about that, because I donate to this place.
Mm-hmm.
The same month at St. Jude's Children Research Hospital in Memphis, Tennessee,
Mm-hmm.
the records show that a lab worker suffered a cut while trying to round up escaped ferrets that had been infected with a deadly strain of avian influenza. This is a children's hospital. This is children that are in there because they are sick. They have terminal illnesses such as cancer, and there is a biological research facility in it.
It's not the
I
only one,
just,
but they do testing on sick
it's not the
children.
only one, but St. Jude's Children's Hospital is a famous hospital.
Yeah, but when
I'm
we,
sorry, like I said, I don't want to get too wound up on this, but this is a hospital that I donate to.
yeah, Holly was asking a little bit, what do the colors mean? The colors mean on the map, okay, like the red ones represent open air testing labs. The green dots represent a level 3 of a BSL lab. A level 4 is the purple ones. The brown ones are under construction labs that haven't yet been built or are in the process of being built. The lighter pinkish purple one is classified as secretive research labs. And the yellow ones, I don't remember if I said that one, is a biodefense aerosol labs. So some of these are doing open testing on people all the time and
Right.
whatnot. But you guys can kind of look up and see what the levels of each description of, 1 through 5 mean on the internet. But 2, 3, and 4 are really high risk to the people who work there and to the environment and people around those facilities. And they shouldn't exist. There's no reason why they should be doing these things, creating viruses that have been extinct for years and years and years and
Well, they
bringing them
tried to
back up.
recreate the 1918 influenza epidemic that killed thousands of people. This was a strain of influenza that was almost extinct, and they're bringing it back. 4 days after the St. Jude Children's Hospital incident,
Mm-hmm.
um, at Colorado State University's bioterrorism lab,
Right. This is
uh,
this year we're talking about.
2014,
Mm-hmm.
a lab where a worker failed to ensure dangerous bacteria had been killed before shipping specimens, some of them still able to grow,
Yeah.
to another lab where another worker unwittingly handled them without any protective gear.
Right.
Because
Basically,
as far as this worker knew, this bacteria was supposed to be dead,
right.
and it wasn't.
Right. Basically, the CDC, which is the Center for Disease and Control and Prevention, uh, what happened is because of that incident, what resulted was the resignation of the top laboratory official in Atlanta. I think his name was Michael Farrell or whatever. He basically resigned. I mean, he'd been working at that laboratory, since 2009, and he just resigned. And they did this internal review of the anthrax incident, and that lab overseen by Farrell used an unimproved method to deactivate the anthrax spores before sending them to the other labs at the CDC, where scientists were not equipped with the proper protective gear to work with live anthrax. Now, not only were they exposed to it, but the shipping method of them getting it, anybody who came in contact was exposed to this anthrax. Now, the agency later discovered that some of the bacteria had not been killed, like you were saying, and the CDC had said that the risk of infections was quote-unquote small, and so far no employees have shown any signs of infection, but that wasn't the truth. And the reason why this was out in the public and how we got to know about it is because there were so many people exposed to it at the time that they couldn't cover it up. And
Right.
basically, the only thing that was like, I don't know how to say it, was like the anthrax and the bird flu lab incidents, and there was people who were exposed to it and it got out to it, and that's the only reason why they couldn't keep it covered, because there were too many employees going to get checked and helped for these viruses, and that's how we became aware of this one incident.
Well, what about the National Institute of Health on their campus when they discovered forgotten vials of smallpox?
Oh yeah. Oops, I forgot that was there. That we all shut it down and anybody was exposed to it or anybody could have
Yeah.
walked off with it. Yeah, I know. That's what I'm saying. I mean,
I mean, that makes you wonder about the safety, the safety protocol in these places. They're not following safety protocol. How do you lose vials of a live smallpox virus?
right. They say there's about, 15,000 scientists, there's probably more, who are authorized to work with these deadly pathogens and viruses and whatever. And they say about maybe 12 or if not a little bit more federal agencies that have, control over this or operate these BSL-3s and 4 labs. But they say there's absolutely like zero, okay? Zero. federal agencies in charge with tracking the number and assessing the risks of these BSL 3, 4, and 5 labs. That means nobody is paying attention to what they're doing, and nobody is making sure that they're keeping safety guidelines and everything else. So we don't even know how many accidents or incidents that they have that's gone by without us being aware of, because there's only so much that are out there on the CDS or CDC website, on a couple, the DHS government website that I ran into, and everything else. But there's a lot of people that aren't talking; they're just being quiet. But all of a sudden, there's certain people in these lab areas where the accidents happen. All of a sudden, you get a bunch of people coming into the hospital with flu-like symptoms that are attributed to these viruses that were just accidentally exposed. You know?
Right. But there are things that you can,
No.
if you want to look this up, there are books that you can read. You can read Germs Gone Wild by Kenneth King. You can read Lab 257 by Michael Carroll.
Right.
There is a movie out called Under Our Skin, and that talks about Lyme disease and the medical, scientific, and pharmaceutical involvement in it.
Yeah, you guys can go see that. Actually, look it up on YouTube and watch it. And I was just like dumb. I was just disgusted by the things that I found out and what we're being told, what we're lied to about the disease, about what they're actually doing for it, and that there is certain cures for it, but they're keeping people from being cured from it. You know, I was just sickened when I watched that, and I was just.
Zombie Killer's asking about losing something. We were talking about the National Institutes of Health campus lost found forgotten vials of the deadly smallpox virus that they had misplaced.
Anthrax, all that junk.
Yeah, anthrax. I mean,
it's not just Plum Island that has. But that's the thing is you can go on these certain sites, whatever. And like I said, I'm going to post all the reference links and everything, so y'all can go and look at it when I have it on our YouTube after our podcast comes up in the description part. But you can go to the DHS government library and look up the transcripts of these meetings and stuff where Plum Island alone has several citations and accidents and issues, that they never even took care of for years and years and years. And now they're like, well, we're moving from this island and we're moving to Kansas. I mean, now Kansas already has a few, couple labs out there. But the fact is there was this one, it was like a university, and I got, what was it? Tornado 4, something like that, one of those big ones, zip past
NF4.
Yeah, zip past that one. But they claimed that they didn't end up having anything happen because of that.
I know
they
moved this lab to Manhattan. They spend over $1 billion, $1 billion,
right,
to move this facility to Manhattan, Kansas, and right in the middle of Tornado Alley. And let's face it, people, nothing against Kansas because I happen to like the state, but y'all have a lot of doggone tornadoes out there, and now they're currently considering selling Plum Island, and the island is currently contaminated. And this is a thing that I don't understand either. Plum Island has been abandoned, and yet it's still guarded. Even today, if you get too close to it, armed military will persuade you
not 100%
to move on.
It's not actually. It's still not 100% abandoned, because the Kansas Manhattan facility is still being built. It's still under construction, and I don't think it's going to be 100% operational until like 2017 or a little bit later. But they do have some buildings done. But yet, I still think that they're continually working on Plum Island. But the fact that they put these things out on an island where it could be exposed to hurricanes and everything else,
right.
That's stupid. The point that they're creating and remaking things have been extinct for a long time just to see if they can do it. it's sickening. Not, I don't think they're thinking they could just so we could do it. They're actually using it. I mean, they're using, like, we're going to talk in the second half about how me and her discovered when we were looking into this and finding out different biolabs.
Different biolabs across the country.
But besides looking into that, that's when I discovered on these government websites and everything else that they were actually doing testing on the American public for years and years and years and years and years, and still to this day are doing it. And people had no idea that they were being dumped and tested on, and people were dying. And we're going to bring that up in the second half of our show. So, I mean, like we said, this was a suggestion from one of our viewers on YouTube on a podcast, and we were like, okay, we'll do it. We were just thinking, oh, Plum Island. We didn't really know so much about it, just little bits that you see.
I knew about
Jesse, from Jesse.
Jesse Ventura conspiracy theories. He did it. One of his earlier shows was on Plum Island, but I'd already known about Plum Island. It was even mentioned in Silence of the Lambs. Plum Island? Where she offered Hannibal Lecter residency on Plum Island, and he knew what it was. But anyway, I had already known about Plum Island, but I had no idea of the extent of it until I started researching for this show.
And then the fact that they had numerous incidents where these deadly pathogens and viruses and diseased ticks and mosquitoes were escaped and exposed into the public,
The thing of it is, Lyme disease, you can get that anywhere in the country now.
But it started in the 70s when they had that African swine flu.
It's even, people in California, Illinois, Iowa, all across the country.
It is now,
get Lyme disease.
But the thing is Lyme disease, okay, a lot of people don't even know this, but the symptoms that a lot of people think of, like with MS, fibromyalgia, Lou Gehrig's disease, certain joint issues, and Alzheimer's, all have been linked back to Lyme disease, and they're symptoms of Lyme disease. So a lot of people are getting, saying, okay, this is what you have. You have Lou Gehrig's disease, or you have MS, or you have this, and you're not tested for Lyme disease. And because you're not tested for Lyme disease, these people ended up suffering way worse and ended up dying. But if they would have got tested for Lyme disease and treated properly right away with all the huge amounts of antibiotics, they would have been cured of these issues.
For years, I thought Lyme disease was from a tick, a deer tick, because that's what we were told. Mm-hmm. I didn't know where it came from until I started researching this. The West Nile virus, Plum Island. Ebola, Plum Island.
West Nile, you say that one? Yeah.
Yeah.
There's other ones.
A lot of diseases that are more prevalent now. And some of these germs and bacterias that they had been working with and they brought back were almost extinct.
Or were
almost completely killed off until this place started fooling with them and brought them back.
Well, right. Let's take like a 3-minute break real quick. So for those of you who are listening over on Ustream, if you guys want, you can scroll down and find the link to our website and join in with our amazing chatters who are in tonight. And we're just going to take a 3-minute break for those of you who want to stand up, stretch, get a drink, go to the bathroom, whatever. And we'll continue with the second part of our show where we're going to talk about where me and Spooky discovered that there have been years and years, like 170, 80 years worth of government testing unknowingly been done on us Americans as well as other countries. So we'll be back in 3 minutes. Thank you for listening. Hey, welcome back to Anything But Ordinary with Spooky and Raven. I'm your host, Raven, and hopefully here's Spooky.
Yep, I'm back.
Woohoo!
You can't get rid of me that quick, that easily.
Sometimes.
Sometimes.
Gotta throw a spider or a snake at you and you're gone.
Well, like Raven said in the first part, Plum Island is not the only warfare lab out there.
Or research
The,
facility, yeah.
or research facility. Excuse me. The U.S.
Hmm?
Offensive Biological Weapons
Well, wait,
Program.
Spooky. A little bit, I guess. We're just gonna say the second part of the show we're gonna kind of bring up and talk about the
Well,
different.
we're gonna talk about the different other biological weapon labs out there.
Well, not the labs. We're kind of going to go into what the government actually did to people unknowingly. Now, in the United
Right.
States, Offense Biological Weapon Program, like you started off saying, was officially begun in spring of 1943 on orders from the U.S. President Franklin Roosevelt and the U.S. Secretary of War. Now, throughout its history, the U.S. bioweapons program was a secret, and it became controversial when it was later revealed that the laboratories and field testing had been common, meaning when it's been exposed that they were doing it to people. Now, like you said earlier, in 1969, President Richard Nixon ended supposedly all the offensive, i.e., non-defensive aspects of the U.S. bioweapons program, but we kind of know that not to be true because they continued doing it underneath that law and keep doing it to this day. Now, these kind of experimentations and testings that was done on humans unknowingly, like I said, it was for the bioweapons research to see what the effects would be and how effective they would be on terrorist or enemy countries or whatever. But when we were researching this, we found like a ton of these, and like I said, I'm going to post the links and stuff up on the podcast description so you guys can go and read it for yourself, not just take our word for what we're saying. But like in 1931, Dr. Cornelius Rhodes, under the Specialists of Rockefeller Institution for Medical Investigations, infects human subjects with cancer cells. Now, later he goes on to establish the U.S. Army Biological Warfare Facility in Maryland, Utah, and Panama, and is named to the U.S. Atomic Energy Commission. And while there, he begins a series of radiation exposure experiments under American soldiers and civilian hospital patients unknowingly. Now, I think a lot of people might know this one. That was the Tuscan experiment. Now, this one happened for 40 years between 1932 and 1972. And what happened was the Public Health Service, working with the Tuscan Institute, began a study to record the natural history of syphilis. Now, it was called the Tuscan Study
Tuskegee.
Oh, sorry. Thank you. I apologize. Of untreated syphilis in the Negro male. That was what it was called. Now, the study initially involved 600 black men. 399 had it and 201 who did not have the disease. Now, the study was conducted without the benefit of the patient's informed consent. So none of them knew about this or knew what they had. Now, the researchers told the men that they were being treated for quote-unquote bad blood. Now, a local term which was basically used to describe, any type of several different ailments back then, including syphilis, anemia, fatigue, stuff like that. Now, their doctors basically had no intention of curing them of this disease at all. The data for the experiment was to be collected from the autopsies of these men after they're dead. And they were thus deliberately left to, degenerate under the from this disease. You know what I mean? Spooky? Because you get tumors, you have the heart
You
disease.
get tumors, heart disease, paralysis, blindness, insanity, and death.
Well, yeah, at the end, yeah.
And as one of the doctors involved explained, he said, and I quote, "As I see it, we have no further interest in these patients until they die." So they were not even treating these people for the syphilis. They were acting like they were treating them and telling them they were treating them, when in actuality they were letting the disease run its course so they could study it.
Right. I mean, they were supposedly this test was only going to be attractive for about like 6 months, but actually it
Right.
continued on for like 40 years. But like you said, the men were never given adequate treatment for the disease. And even when penicillin came
Did you know
out,
syphilis is what Al Capone died of
yeah, yeah, but
because it was untreated?
right, right. You're right. But even when they had penicillin came out, and that was the drug of choice for syphilis back in 1947, the researchers still did not offer those all those men to be cured of it because they didn't want them to be cured. They wanted them to suffer and die, and they wanted to see the effects of what's
Well,
going to happen.
the advisory panel found nothing to show that the subjects were even given the choice of quitting the study.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know why I'm stuttering tonight. Uh, the subjects were not given the choice of quitting the study, or
Mm-hmm.
even when this new highly effective treatment became widely used.
Mm-hmm.
The men were misled, and they were not given all the facts required to provide informed
Right, because
consent.
they were saying at the time, they were saying, oh, they knew what was going on, oh, they knew what they
Yeah.
had, but none of these 600 and some uh, colored men knew it. But they also claimed that they were doing a test on white folk as well to see what's the difference between
And they weren't.
the color and the white and the effects of what was going on, but they weren't at all. There's no information that I could find anywhere that shows about the other side of the coin of the other people being tested. There's only the government paper of these guys.
And the thing of it was, too, in July of 1972, the advisory panel concluded that the Tuskegee study was ethically
Yeah, unjustified.
unjustified. Oh my
Right.
goodness! I can usually pronounce words better than this.
Well, we have a lot in our brain
And
tonight.
that the knowledge gained was sparse when compared to the risk that the study posed for its subjects.
Right.
Um,
Well, in
so
72, the panel advised stopping the study at once. But a month later, I think it was the Assistant Secretary for the Health and Scientific Affairs announced that the end of the study.
of the study.
Right.
And then in the summer of 73, there was a class action lawsuit filed on behalf of the study participants and their families.
Yeah, the ones who were left
And
alive.
then in 1970, yeah, the ones left alive. And then in 1974, a $10 million out of court settlement was reached. But as part of the settlement, the United States government promised to give lifetime medical benefits and burial services
Whoopee.
to, oh yeah, whoop-dee-doo, to
The leftover participants that are still alive.
the remaining participants.
That's like a FU to them, you know.
Yeah, and President Clinton apologized
Oh yeah. To the last 8
in
so
in
people
May
left.
in May of 1997. President Clinton apologized to the 8 remaining survivors.
Right. He I think he was like saying like the United States government did something that was wrong and deeply profounded morally wrong, and it was
clearly
outrage
racist.
to our commitment to integrity and equality for all citizens. You know, clearly it was racist. That was like something like he said or something. But, you know, whatever. They all knew about this stuff. And the fact is, if they didn't get caught, they would have probably continued that testing till the point that they did get caught. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And the fact is, you know what they gave this man? They said, okay, they fed him and they allowed him to have free medical treatment. Well, they weren't even being treated. They were being
No, they
studied
weren't.
until they were dead.
That's right. They let this disease, this horrible disease, run its course through these people. And
Until this thing was
every
exposed.
single day they would go through these motions, putting on this show that they were treating them for this disease.
Bad blood.
And they were giving them nothing.
Yeah, they were told that they were being cured of their ailment of bad blood. Okay.
And they didn't even tell them that they had infected them with syphilis.
I know, right? That's horrible. I mean, that's just one well-known one, not to
Right.
everybody.
Well,
but
in 1935.
yeah. Go ahead. Sorry.
That was the pellagra incident, and that's when millions of individuals died from pellagra over a span of 2 decades, and the U.S. Public Health Service finally acted to
Stem the
contain
disease.
this disease.
Yeah.
The director of the agency admits it had known for at least 20 years that pellagra is caused by niacin deficiency, but they failed to act since most of the deaths occurred within poverty-stricken black populations.
I know that's sickening, isn't that?
I know. And then in 1940, 400 prisoners in Chicago were infected with malaria in order to study the effects of new and experimental drugs to combat this disease. And Nazi doctors later on trial in Nuremberg cite this American study to defend their own actions during the Holocaust.
Right. Our own country was doing similar horrific things to people unknowingly for years and years, as well as the Germans were over in there. That's what they were saying. But like, okay, 1945. Remember the Project Paperclip that we mentioned during the first hour, and that's when the U.S. State Department, Army intelligence and the CIA recruited the Nazi scientists and offered them immunity for their secrets in exchange for them to work on our top secret government projects in the United States. I mean, that was in 45. So they were already doing things before they came. That's why they chased after these 2,000 scientists to get them to come here. Now, also, this is one that's insane, okay? And people are always talking about this. They're always like, oh, they're conspiracy theorists and you guys are crazy and stuff. But these are legitimate experiments.
These are documented experiments
that are out there that you guys can go and look up because that's how we found them. But in 1945, Program F is implemented by the U.S. Atomic Energy Commission, the AEC. Now, this is the most extensive U.S. study of the health effects of fluoride. Everybody talks about that one, remember? They're like, oh, you're crazy. But
fluoride is used in mind control drugs, for all of you that didn't know that.
Well,
go ahead.
Probably
Sorry,
a lot of people.
I didn't mean to interrupt you.
She had to get it in there.
But it popped in my head, and I had to get it out.
We never know what we're going to talk about. But which, fluoride is the key chemical component in the atomic bomb production also.
Right.
Now, it's one of the most toxic chemicals known to man. Now, fluoride, it is found and causes marked adverse effects to the central nervous system, but much of the information is squelched in the name of national security because of the fear of the lawsuits would undermine full-scale production of the atomic bomb back then in 1945. Now, you guys also know in the same era, that's when the that's
when they started fluoridating the water.
Yeah.
Drinking water.
Yeah, I just lost my thoughts. We have so much things in our head trying to get out, so we're normally doing a lot better than tonight. But that was possibly the largest, most unethical, and longest lasting experiment of all time. I mean, that's like 60 years and still going strong that they're pumping fluoride in our water. Gosh knows everything else they got in there, too. I mean, Edward L. Bernard, the PR psychologist behind the rollout has been...
Psychologist.
Well, whatever. I'm trying to get all the words out here. I'm in school. I'm going to correct you now. But even when we brush our teeth daily with the substance, that's, the substance is like basically slightly less toxic than arsenic, but more toxic than lead. I mean, we got it in almost everything of our products. Now, the water fluoridation is a political policy, and the CDC, Department of Public Health, will never admit that they are wrong, and our water systems are simply the disposal system for, these quote-unquote pesky industrial byproducts. Dilution is the solution to pollution, you know what I mean?
When I buy toothpaste, I never get toothpaste with fluoride in it. If it says on there fluoride, I don't buy it.
Well,
I don't buy it because fluoride, okay, so in our toothpaste, we may get it in small doses, but it's still toxic.
If you read the toothpaste thing, it says barely use a little of it. You know what I mean? But people put more than that on, but you're constantly using it every day.
I've never seen any real study that says that it actually prevents cavities.
It doesn't. Okay, they had so much of this stuff left over. They started let's just start pumping in the water and everything else. Yeah. But like we say, they're doing bioweapon unknowingly
we got
experiments.
Millions of gallons of fluoride left. Why don't we just spread it out to the American public
and everybody? But it's not just that. I mean, even it's happening to us unknowingly all the time. But even in 1946, they had patients in the VA hospitals. They were used as guinea pigs for medical experiments in order to allay the suspicions of it, the order was given to change the word from experiment into investigations,
Oh yeah, that
or
makes it so much better.
or observations.
Observations.
Yes, I was talking so much good earlier, but no, I can't. But they're basically testing on sick people already in the hospital, which are vets who fought for freedoms and
Yeah,
everything
in
else,
veterans
unknowingly
hospitals.
keeping them
Yeah, in veterans
sick
hospitals.
and pumping them full of all these different things, and that was in
Yeah.
46 that you can read about.
Well, in 1947, Colonel E. Kirkpatrick of the U.S. Atomic Energy Commission issued a secret document, and it's document number 07075001 from January 8th of 1947, stating that the agency will begin administering intravenous doses of radioactive substances to
Human
human
subjects, yeah.
subjects
Unknowingly. These are unknowingly
unknowingly.
tests of what we're talking about. They're doing this to everybody without anybody aware of what's happening. And these are,
Yeah, and then in 1950, the Department of Defense begins plans to detonate nuclear weapons in desert areas and monitor downwind residents for medical problems and mortality rates.
I know. Well, it's
They
just
knew when they knew when they detonated those bombs,
what they were
testing
doing.
them,
Yep.
what was going to
Well, they
happen.
also, didn't they have like a bunch of soldiers at different levels of that testing site? From ranges, I mean, closeness to
Yeah.
far away to see the effects of if you were said
Well,
this close and this close
Operation
and this close.
well,
No, and well, they also had 1950 had Operation LAC experiment, and that was
yeah,
the order to conduct a
simulation of biological warfare attack.
right on the U.S. Navy uh, and airplanes. What they use is they use like these airplanes to spray large quantities of the bacteria. What the heck was it called? Serae.
Serratia marsensens.
Yeah, that's the one. And they basically well, I was looking at my notes here, but yeah, that's the one. But they considered that harmless at the time, which it wasn't. So they sprayed this over the city of San Francisco, and they had placed all these different monitoring devices in different areas throughout the city in order to test the extent of the infection and how far it traveled. Well, it traveled more than 30 miles. Now, numerous citizens contracted, ammonia-like illnesses, and at least from that one in the 50s, they stated that at least only one person died from that result, but a ton of other people got sick. Now, I think what they said was one of the family of the men who died sued the government for, gross negligence, but the federal judge ruled in favor of the government. So, surprise, surprise. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But they continued to test dumping that bacteria continued in that area until at least 1969. Now, they also said that one dispersed test involved laboratory personnel disguised as passengers spraying harmless bacteria in Washington's National Airport as well. Now, medical experts were conducted on or experiments, excuse me, were conducted on a large scale on civilians who had not consented to this participation. Now, often these experiments took place in urban areas in order to test the dispersion methods, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And it was then that people started questioning, you know.
Well, questions were raised about detrimental health effects after the experiments were followed by a spike in hospital visits.
Well, yeah, that's what I was saying. In 1977, the CDC basically determined that there was no association between these tests that happened there and the occurrence of why people all of a sudden had the ammonia or the influenza in that area from 50 to 19 years. That's what it's stating. But of course, it's just they happen to be sick. It has nothing to do with what they were doing. Well, in 1951, the Department of Defense began open air testing as well, using disease-producing bacteria and viruses. And those tests also lasted through until 1969. And there is a concern that people in those surrounding areas as well had been exposed to it.
Well, in
Well, 1953, I have one more too. Hold on a second. I have one more off the list. It says the U.S. military releases clouds of zinc cadmium sulfide gas over Winnipeg, St. Louis, Minneapolis, Fort Wayne, and the I can't read that one. She wrote better.
Monocacy River Valley.
Maryland, yeah, and then there's Leesburg, Virginia.
Leesburg, Virginia.
Thank you. Their intent is to determine how efficiently they could disperse the chemical agents, i.e., like chemtrails. You know what I'm
Yep.
saying?
Chemtrails.
But they
Those
didn't
are your
call them
chemtrails
chemtrails
people.
back then, but it started in 53. They already started doing this.
Well, also in 1953, joint Army, Navy, and CIA experiments were conducted in which tens of thousands of people in New York and San Francisco were exposed to the airborne germs of Serratia
Mm-hmm.
and Bacillus
Spell it.
glogigi.
Well, you can spell it.
Glogigii.
Mm-hmm.
I can never pronounce that.
Hey, it's mouthful tonight.
Also in 1953, the CIA initiates Project
Ultra.
MKULTRA.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure what that stands for. I knew about 2 hours ago. This was an 11-year research program designed to produce and test drugs and biological agents that would be used for mind control people and behavior modification.
Mm-hmm.
6 of the sub projects involved testing the agents on unwitting human beings.
So far, everything we're stating has been on unknowing, people not agreeing to these experiments all over the country. Not just
Right.
our country, but they also had it happened in other countries that they are. It wasn't like Guatemala and some other places they did too. Like,
Yeah, I believe so.
mm-hmm.
In 1955, the CIA conducted a biological warfare experiment where they released whooping cough bacteria from boats outside of Tampa Bay, Florida, causing a whooping cough epidemic in the city that killed at least 12 people.
This is just great stuff. No, it's not. It's sickening the things that we were finding and reading about. I mean, in 56 and 57, the U.S. Army biological warfare experiments called Operation Dropkick were conducted on the cities of Savannah, Georgia, and someplace in Florida. Was it Avon Park in Florida? Now, in those experiments, the Army biowarfare researchers released millions of infected mosquitoes on 2 towns in order to see if the insects could potentially spread yellow fever and what was the other one? Yellow fever and
Dengue fever.
dengue fever.
And I don't know what that is.
There's something else too. But hundreds of the residents contracted a wide array of illnesses, including fevers, respiratory problems, stillbirths, typhoid,
Encephalitis.
And the Army researchers pretended to be public health workers. I love that, how they just pretend they're somebody else.
I know.
So that they could photograph and perform medical tests on the victims. You know, several people died as a result of that experiment. And now also because of the EW tests, there was also Operation Big Itch. I didn't name these. Operation Big Buzz and Operation Mayday. Now, EW is a specific type of biological warfare which aims to use insects as weapons, either directly or through their potential to act as vectors. Now, in 51 and 52, they had another one was called Operation Dew. Now, that took place off the southeast coast of the United States, including near Georgia and North and South Carolina. Now, Operation Dew consisted of basically 2 sets of trials, Spooky. Now, one of them, the test involved the release of like 250 pounds of fluorescent particles from a minesweeper off the coast. And Operation Dew 1 was described in the U.S. Army report known as Dugway Special Report 162, dated August 1st, 1952. Now, the purpose of Operation Dew was to study the behavior of, like, aerosol-released biological agents. And it consisted of, like, 5 separate trials from, like, March 26th of 1952 until, like, April 21st of 1952 that were designed to test the feasibility of maintaining a large aerosol cloud released offshore until it drifted overland, achieving large area coverage, which reminds me of, again, chemtrails. But the
They're
test...
trying to maintain this large aerosol cloud.
Yep, together, to
released
see how far it would stay together, polluting, how much it would pollute for how long. Now, the
before
test
it just
dissipated
before it
into the ground.
dissipates
Yeah.
over land. Wow.
Right. Now, the test released zinc cadmium sulfide along with 100 to like 150 nautical miles, and it was off the coast of Georgia, North Carolina, and South Carolina. Now, the two of the trials dispersed clouds over the large areas of all three U.S. states. Now, the test affected over 60,000 square miles of populated coastal regions in the U.S. Southeast. Now, the D1 trial was released were from a Navy minesweeper, and the D2, the second trial, involved the release of fluorescent particles, zinc, cadmium, sulfide.
Cadmium.
Thank you. And plant
Neon.
spores. I don't know that one. Lycopodium from the aircraft. Now D2.
Lycopodium.
Thanks. Was described in 1953 Army report, which seemed classified at the time of 1997 report by the U.S. National Research Council concerning the U.S. Army zinc
cadmium
sulfide dispersum program of the 1950s. Following each test, Army agents posing as public health officials test victims for effects. So they were doing several of these chemtrail type effects, even back in the 50s, So.
Well, in 1955, the CIA, in an experiment to test its ability to infect human populations with biological agents, released bacteria withdrawn from the Army's biological warfare arsenal over Tampa Bay, Florida. And then in 1965, Project CIA and Department of Defense began Project MK Search. Mm-hmm. That was a program to develop a capability to manipulate human behavior through the use of mind-altering drugs.
Mm-hmm.
Also in 1965, prisoners at the Holmesburg State Prison in Philadelphia were subjected to dioxin.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a highly toxic chemical component of Agent Orange used in Vietnam.
Mm-hmm.
And the men were later studied for development of cancer, which indicated that Agent Orange had been a suspected carcinogen all along. Carcinogen is a cancer-causing agent.
Right, and they were fighting, a lot of the vets were fighting about this, saying that you gave us cancer because of the Agent Orange, and they were like, no, but it got proven later on that it was.
Well, talking about that dioxin, there is a place here, not far from me, that is across the river.
Mm-hmm.
It's called Times Beach. It was a small community, and there was probably a couple thousand people that lived there. That entire town had to be evacuated because they buried dioxin there, and the entire community was contaminated, and these people from Times Beach didn't even know that dioxin was buried there.
Surprise, surprise, right? I mean, everything we're talking about, now, these people were unknowingly tested
now,
for this stuff.
This happened, I don't know, about 15, 20 years ago. It's been a while back.
Right.
But that is the reason that little town was evacuated.
Right.
And people were, and it had a very, very high rate of cancer. It had one, and Times Beach is actually in Missouri, but like I said, it's just across the river. But they had a high rate of cancer. They had a high rate of other illnesses and everything, and it finally came out that there was dioxin buried there. And so the whole town had to be evacuated. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, that's good to say this stuff. I mean, we didn't know about all this stuff, and because we had a viewer request from YouTube to do a couple shows about Plum Island and Denver Airport, that's how we stumbled on these things, and it's out there for anybody to read. But the fact that we're not even aware of this stuff is sickening. I mean, even in 1968, the CIA initiated a project called I think it was called MK Often or whatever, OFTEN.
In 1966.
Oh, what did I say?
68.
Oh,
sorry.
There's like so much information we're trying to get out. We're like getting tongue-tied with all of this. I apologize, guys. We usually talk a lot better, but I mean, I'm I'm like upset by half the stuff I'm reading about. You know what I mean? But this program was the test of what was it again? A test on toxicological effects of certain drugs.
Toxicological I don't know.
No,
I'm I can't believe this. I'm having so much trouble pronouncing words tonight. And these are words that
you
I
always talk
actually,
about, yeah.
these are words that I actually can
I
pronounce.
know. I don't. There's just we have so much information we're trying to pump out in 2 hours, so people can be aware of it and go look at and talk to other people and say, hey, be aware of what's in your backyard. But I mean, they were using these to see the effects of certain drugs on humans and animals. Now in '66, okay, the U.S. Army released a harmless. That was that one bacteria you said before that. Bacillus
Bacillus
Bacillus globa. Yeah.
globigi.
Yeah, you mentioned that one before. Now, here they're using it again in 1966 in the tunnels of the New York City subway system as a part of a field study called A Study of the Vulnerability of a Subway Passenger in the New York City to Covert Attack
Isn't that a
with
stupid?
Biological Agents. That's a big ass
Isn't
name
that
to use.
a stupid title? It was a field study called A Study of the Vulnerability of Subway Passengers
I
in New
just said
York
that.
City
Yeah.
to convert attack with
Covert.
biological agents.
Covert. Covert.
To covert attack, whatever.
But they also did that. But
Somebody funded that.
well, we know who. But the Chicago subway system was also subject to the similar experiment by the Army, and more than a million, okay, million civilians are exposed. And they also had Army scientists go down and drop light bulbs filled with that same bacteria onto the ventilation grates.
On civilian people on their way to work, just
Home and
sitting
work
on
or
the
visiting or doing whatever in New York and
waiting
in
on
Chicago.
waiting for the subway,
Mm-hmm.
and they're gassed or they're infected with something.
Right. Just to see
You
the
know,
effects of what would
just
happen.
to see the effects.
Right.
Just as let's get
Okay.
this one. She ain't doing nothing.
Oh,
Oh my gosh.
yeah.
Well, it
I know.
some of this can just get you
We are
riled up. Let
wild
me
up.
tell you.
Yeah. People should get
And
mad. I mean,
well, they should
your
get mad. They
government
really
is
should.
doing this to you. We're killing off people, purposely exposing them to deadly
In
pathogens.
Yeah, in 1967, the CIA and the Department of Defense implement Project MKNAOMI.
Mm-hmm.
That was the successor to MK Ultra,
Oh, yep.
and
We
it
just
was
talked about.
designed to maintain, stockpile, and test biological chemical weapons.
Right.
Um,
68. They had other testing where they were, possibly poisoning
with the
drinking
possible,
water by injecting chemicals into the water supply of the FDA in Washington D.C. too. Remember?
yeah. And in 1969, Dr. Robert McMahon of the Department of Defense requests from Congress $10 million to develop within 5 to 10 years a synthetic biological agent to which no natural immunity exists.
Do you get that last part? What she just said? No natural immunity can exist. Meaning they want to create something. I'm funding you
That
millions
there
and
is
millions of
no
dollars
cure
that
for.
you can create something that nobody can be cured of and that they will die. Meaning let's take out some of the population. Sick man.
Yeah. And in 1970, the funding for the synthetic biological agent was obtained under H.R. 15090. The project was under the supervision of the CIA and was carried out by Special Operations Division at Fort Detrick in Maryland, the Army's top secret biological weapons facility.
Yep, that was the
And
one above Plum Island. Yep.
yeah, and it was tied into Plum Island.
Mm-hmm.
And speculation is raised that molecular biology techniques are used to produce AIDS like retroviruses.
Yep, they created AIDS, people. They did. Now, and they also in the 70s, what was it? The United States just started to develop the ethnic weapons, and that's where
Oh
they
wow!
Basically,
Finally, in the 70s, they're thinking.
I'm sure it was. But what they were doing was they designed to selectively target and eliminate specific ethnic groups who are susceptible due to genetic differences and variations in their DNA. So they have ethnic bioweapon diseases that they designed to take out certain types of groups of people because of their genetics and their DNA. And like in 75, like you were talking about, virus sector in the Fort Detrick Center again, um, they changed that
Oh
name.
yeah,
They
for
remember they
biolog
changed it
yeah,
from
for
biological warfare research into the cancer
the Frederick Cancer
research
Research
facility. Isn't that
Facility.
nice? All of a sudden, it was a biological warfare place where they were creating
And
these things, and
and
now it's a strictly for cancer research,
yeah,
which
placed
they
under the
create.
supervision of the National Cancer Institute.
Mm-hmm.
And
NCI, yeah.
yeah, and it's there that a special virus cancer program is initiated by the U.S. Navy,
Mm-hmm.
purportedly to develop cancer-causing viruses.
I
And
know.
it was also there that retrovir biolo
Virologists, yeah.
yeah, thank you. They isolate a virus to which no immunity exists, and it's later named HTLV, human T cell leukemia virus.
Get that, guys? Leukemia, cancer, and guess what? A lot of kids get that, right? And they also
Right.
test. And the sickening thing is, we're reading tons of this stuff.
Now grown-ups can't get
Well, everybody gets
leukemia, but
cancer.
it's more common in children.
Right, but when we were reading about that, they actually tested on orphans and they test on sick children who are in children's hospitals, injecting them with this stuff. They came in with something simpler and they're like, well, let's just pump them with this and see what happens. I mean, even in 77, the Senate hearings on health and scientific research confirmed that 239 populated areas had been contaminated with biological agents between 49 and 69. Now, some of these areas included San Francisco, which we already talked about, Washington, D.C., Key West, Panama City, Minneapolis, and St. Louis. You know, even in 78, they experimented with the hepatitis B, remember?
But yeah,
And they conducted, the CDC conducted beginning in New York and Los Angeles and just people get out of San Francisco because it looks like we're reading down the list and San Francisco is just getting hit every time.
it
Okay?
seems like San Francisco is ground zero for this stuff.
Run.
Um,
Flee from San Francisco.
and the thing of it was, the ads for the research subjects specifically asked for promiscuous homosexual men.
Yeah, they were infecting them with these things, on purpose.
And then,
Unknowingly. Okay, all these things we're talking about, people, are unknowingly experiments that are happening on
well,
our,
are happening now
yeah,
in our country now. In
back then.
1981, the first cases of AIDS were confirmed in homosexual men in New York, Los Angeles, San Francisco, triggering a speculation that AIDS may have been introduced by way of the
Yep,
hepatitis B vaccine.
in 78, see? It's sickening. I mean, in 85, according to the journal Science, 227 173-177, the HTLV, which we talked about, and the VISNA, a fatal sheep virus, are very similar, indicating a close,
Taxonomic.
yeah, an evolutionary relationship. And in 86, the proceedings of the National Academy of Science, the HIV, which we talked about, and the VISNA are highly similar and share all structural elements except for a small segment, which is nearly identical to the HTLV, which we just talked about a little bit above. Now, this leads to speculation that the HTLV and the VISNA may have been linked to produce a new retrovirus to which get this again, another one, no natural immunity exists. So they keep creating these things so you guys cannot be cured of them. And yet they're dumping them on people unknowingly. And
And
injecting you
also,
with it, asking you to come in for other things, and then pow, there you get it.
there you get it. Also in 1986, a report to Congress reveals that the U.S. government's current generation of biological agents includes modified viruses,
Mm-hmm.
naturally occurring toxins, and agents that are altered through genetic engineering to change immunological character
Mm-hmm.
and prevent treatment by all existing vaccines.
Yeah, no treatment. See, another one. They're getting more
They're
worse.
altering the genetic engine, the genetic composition of them.
Right.
And then,
In 87, they had that.
yeah, in '87,
Mm-hmm.
The Department of Defense admits that despite a treaty banning research and development of biological agents, it continued to operate research facilities at 127 facilities and universities around the nation. And that's another thing too.
They were
You
told to
sit
stop doing this stuff, and they continued to do it,
they
and
right,
worse.
and you're sending and this is something else too. You're sending your kids to colleges and universities,
That these
and
things
some
are.
of these have biological weapons labs in them.
Mm-hmm.
You don't know what you're exposing your kids to.
That's not just it. I mean, on the map and stuff, you show we got them in our own backyard practically. There's a building back there, and you don't even know that they're working with deadly pathogens that there's no cure for because
Right.
they're creating these things to happen. I
Yeah.
mean, in 1990, they had more than 1,500 6-month-old Black and Hispanic babies in Los Angeles. They were given into experimental measles vaccine that had never been licensed for use in the United States. And now the CDC later admits that parents were never informed that the vaccine being injected into their children was experimental. So they were giving these kids deadly, viruses and the measles
Yeah, the
on
parents
purpose,
the
and
parents
had no
thought
clue.
that their kids were getting a measles vaccine,
Yeah, and it wasn't.
and but they were not informed that it was only experimental. And in 1994, with a technique called gene tracking,
Mm-hmm.
a Dr. Garth Nicholson at the Maryland Anderson Cancer Center in Houston, Texas, at the MD Anderson Cancer Center in Houston, Texas. I don't know where my head was, people.
It's okay.
Uh,
It's a
he
intense
discovers
show.
that many returning Desert Storm veterans were infected with an altered strain of Mycoplasma incognitus, which is a microbe commonly used in the production of biological weapons.
Mm-hmm.
Incorporated into its molecular structure is 40% of the
HIV.
HIV protein coat,
Nice.
indicating that it had been man made.
Yep. And you can actually track down these. If you study the virus, or whatever, they can actually track down to what lab actually had this, created it, and manufactured it. And that's the thing. That's why you can actually track down, if they wanted to, where Lyme disease actually came from. They'd find out it came from Plum Island. But in 1994, Senator John D. Rockefeller issues a report revealing that for the last 50 years, the Department of Defense has used hundreds of thousands of military personnel in human experiments for intentional exposure to dangerous substances. Isn't that nice? You join the Army thinking, I'm going to do something good. I'm going to fight for my country, and I love my country, and do all this good stuff, and here you are used as a guinea pig. I mean, the materials included mustard and nerve gas, radiation, psych chemicals, hallucinogens, drugs used during the Gulf War. It goes on and on and on. I mean, even in 1995, the U.S. government admits that it had offered Japanese war criminals and scientists back then who had performed human medical experiments salaries and, free of their war crimes. Yep. From prosecution in exchange for their data in biological warfare research. So you got they're letting huge war crime criminals from Japan
and they're giving immunity.
Germany and everywhere else. They're like, oh, no problem, just give us your information. Come work for us.
Committed all of these hideous, horrible war crimes,
Right.
and they're given immunity. And also in 1995, Dr. Garth Nicholson uncovers evidence that the biological agents used during the Gulf War had been manufactured in Houston, Texas, Boca Raton, Florida, and tested on prisoners in the Texas Department of Corrections.
Yeah, someone's mentioning about flu shots, but actually flu shots you're just being exposed to, it doesn't stop you from having the flu. It actually, you're being injected with a mercury and other deadly viruses and everything else. It was actually created to do the same experiments that they're doing now that we're talking about. So, but even, did you say the one in 1996 where they used the Desert Storm soldiers where they're exposed to chemical agents as well?
No, but you just did.
In 1997, they had that 88 members of Congress sign a letter demanding an investigation into the bioweapons used in the Gulf War syndrome,
Well, there were a lot of soldiers coming home from the Gulf War that were just losing their minds. They were hallucinating. They were going on rampages. They were killing themselves. They were killing other people, and they didn't know why
Mm-hmm.
they were doing it. And a lot of the so-called doctors said that they had
Yeah, PTOS or something. Post traumatic.
post-traumatic distress syndrome.
Yeah, yeah, that's one.
And when in reality, they had been subjected to different chemical agents.
Mm-hmm.
They were experimented on
Mm-hmm.
without their knowledge.
Yeah, I mean, this is stuff that we found on government website pages and everything else. I mean, we're not here to, say, oh, do what we say or whatever else. We're just saying, okay, we stumbled on this. We think it should be put out there, and other people should become aware of it as well, because we weren't aware of all these things either. And I think it needs to be said so these things can stop, because we're not, I mean, we have to come together as a group of people and stop this stuff. This is ridiculous. I mean, even in 2001, after, we had that terrorist attack in New York and Washington, D.C., they had a series of mysterious anthrax attacks aimed at the U.S. media office and the U.S. Senate, which killed 5 people. And that anthrax used in the attack was the AMES strain,
Ames strain.
Okay, which was first studied at Fort Detrick and then distributed to other labs, meaning that anthrax that happened to us wasn't by terrorists. It came from our own country, people. It was released from our own people. After that anthrax attack of 2001, which the FBI say were perpetrated, it happened because of a mentally unbalanced U.S. biodefense researcher. That's what they claimed it was.
The FBI said.
But they were covering up their own stuff. I mean, the government began funding hundreds of new high-risk biodefense labs around the country right after that thing. Now, current experiments are still continuing today. I mean, this is just a bunch we're reading off, but running out of time because we only have a 2-hour show. But, I mean, some people believe they are being dispersed via geo-weather modification, which is i.e. chemtrails by the government, airplanes, and drones. You got the GMO foods by the government and medical through new prescription drugs. And I know somebody was talking about this. A lot of people think it's good, but it's also through the tainted vaccines. I mean, everything we're listening is talking about, they tainted these vaccines. It's been proven through a wealth of recent medical research indicates that vaccines are not safe and may cause serious neurological problems, seizures, autism, and even death. And sadly, it's just not out for the public to know. They don't tell you. They just say, hey, get injected with this. I'll give you a free case of Pepsi. You ever drive down the street and you see those little Walgreens and stuff? They'll say, come get these 5 different vaccine shots and we'll give you 2 free cases of soda.
Just walk on in. You don't need an appointment, and then they'll charge your insurance for this toxin that they're shooting into your body.
And there are so many people after getting these vaccinations that are supposedly to help you fight with the flu. 1, they're injecting you with these viruses in the first place. 2, they're injecting you with several different chemicals and stuff, and you can read about it. Go research it. I mean, the doctors are being pushed to tell you to take this stuff, because if you don't push the pills and you don't push the testing, the drugs, and the
every
vaccines,
time I go to my
your license,
Every time I go to my doctor, he asks me, have you had your flu shot?
I tell him, nope. I don't even go to the doctor.
I tell him, yeah, I had it.
Yeah, that's true.
He sees so many patients he wouldn't remember anyway.
But, I mean, we encourage you guys to continue looking up and stuff, and you'll see they're, even past 2001, they're still doing experiments on people and stuff. But the fact is that they were already starting to modify and experiment with chemtrails back in the 50s. And now if you look up in the sky, you see thousands of trails crisscrossing, making patterns. Sometimes you see them making, like, the tic-tac box and everything. It's sickening. It's gross, what they're doing. All these things that we were talking tonight, I had no idea all of this happened. If it wasn't for the person suggesting those 2 show topics on, one of our YouTube viewers, or a couple of them, me and you have never probably would have ran into all this information.
Yeah.
And I think other people should be aware of it.
Really. As an American citizen, you have the right and the responsibility to know what is going on in your country and possibly in your own backyard. Mm-hmm. Now, we're not saying to run out and join an environmental group and become a tree hugger, but in my opinion, you should prepare yourself in case something does happen.
Yeah, for sure.
Right.
Get informed.
One last thing we have is we're going to give you 10 reasons to worry.
And it came from that book, Germs Gone Wild, right?
Right.
Okay.
This came from the book Germs Gone Wild. Number 1, huge proliferation of new high-risk labs. Over 1,100 in the U.S. since 2001, possibly hundreds more. Number two, who's keeping track? No one in the government. At least that's what the Government Accountability Office said in 2007.
It's true. That's one of the
So
things that stated
basically,
about too.
these labs are regulating themselves.
Yep.
Three, lots of new, inexperienced researchers. 15,000 plus, and most of them never worked with bioweapons before 2001.
Mm-hmm.
Number four, safety regulators missing in action. Okay, according to the Government Accountability Office in 2007, many labs are not regulated at all, and the others are given minimal attention. They are essentially regulating themselves,
Yep.
like I said before.
Right.
What am I on? Five?
I don't know.
Number five, risky research. Breeding antibiotic resistance into existing bioweapons agents. Recreating the 1918 flu, creating deadly forms of the bird flu that spread easily between people.
Mm-hmm.
Six, accidents frequently happen. Technologies fail people.
The human
People,
error.
yeah, people ignore routine safety procedures. Infected researchers typically go undiagnosed for weeks.
Yep. And then out in the public, exposing people
Yeah,
to
and they're
things.
out in the public
Mhm.
spreading this around.
Yeah.
Number seven, secrecy and deception. The labs and government agencies which regulate them keep accidents from the public.
Which was proven, through tonight.
Yeah,
So yeah.
and they tell you that
Nothing. You
that
don't.
these
No, don't tell you
labs,
nothing. That's the thing.
yeah,
They
they
don't
don't tell
talk
you
about it.
nothing. But if something does happen to leak out, some news of
They'll
it, they
make it
tell
up as
you
some terror
that the
test or
labs
crazy guy did it.
are of no risk.
Yep. Mm-hmm. It wasn't from
Number
us. It was
eight,
somebody else who did it.
yeah. Number eight, conflict of interest. The government agencies involved in regulation all operate dangerous labs themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Number nine, this is probably the big one, money.
Greed. Yeah.
Oh my
That's what it
gosh.
all comes down to, really. Greed. That's the
The
one number one
sevenfold
evil of the world.
increase, yeah, the sevenfold increase in biodefense funding after 2001 gave birth to a biodefense complex determined to keep the funding levels high and therefore are devoted into hyping the fears of bioterrorism. In other words, the more fear they instill,
The
the
more
more
people,
money they get.
right? The more people run out and get these
And
cures or
yeah,
protections, which not, because their goal is to depopulate. So
that's right. Exactly. And number 10, waste. Over 60 billion spent since 2001. 60 billion dollars.
mm-hmm.
This is money that could go into other programs that actually help people.
Mm. There
And
isn't
it's
really programs that help people. They create It's like a big circle and cycle. It's just keep
yeah.
the people sick, keep putting them on these pills so they don't get better. So that's how you keep making their money. You know what I
But
mean?
this is on repetitive research,
Right. Oh, I
trying
see,
to futilely whatever
yeah.
to create magical bullets
Right.
against a score of bioweapons agents
That they're
and
creating.
creating new agents that require new countermeasures
Right.
that require new countermeasures that require new countermeasures.
Right.
Draining money from important public health research and from our ailing public health infrastructure.
But right, and some of the testing that we talked about that we found out that's on these government things that we read about talks about how they're making these things that they're no natural, and there's no immunity. There's like no vaccine that could cure them of these things. So they're creating things and then pretending to create things that are going to cure you just to keep you more sick with other things. It's sickening.
I know.
Was
I
that
know.
10 that you just read?
That was 10.
Well, before you go into your end spiel, I just want to say about the movie Under Our Skin, just to kind of mention a bit, because we didn't really say what it was, but we did say go check it out and watch it. It's basically, it's basically like a documentary where They're diagnosing Lyme disease as the fact that its symptoms are very broad and they seem to mimic those of other diseases, like I mentioned, and they vary from patient to patient. Now, this documentary investigates the epidemic where we are all now facing and traces and flourishes the neglect and the corrupt healthcare system as well. And they interview with patients and doctors, and it paints basically a clear picture of the medical industry that has decided to place profits ahead of health of people it's supposed to be treating. And that's what we're talking about, the corruption of all this. And I think it's an amazing documentary, and you guys can all watch it on YouTube. It's called Under Our Skin, and I think it's going to just blow you guys' mind, because when I stumbled on it after like we said, we got into researching about Plum Island, and we discovered all these bio research labs, and then we found out all the millions, zillions of testings that they, unknowingly dumped on people to kill them off and to see how they'd be affected by it. The government.
Right.
It's sickening.
And if you stop and think about it, with the chemtrails, we are still being experimented on.
Well, yeah, you have GMO.
Only now we know what they are.
That. But it's not just chemtrails. You got prescription pills. You got, GMO chemical that's labeled food, but it's not food. It's all chemicals. So who knows what that's doing to people. People are getting diabetes, and everything else. But a lot of the diseases that are created today are curable just by changing what you do, by changing what you did to get yourself in that condition. Stop putting certain chemicals on your body, or stop eating certain foods that aren't food, and start eating things that are alive, vegetables, fruits, and start eating healthy and stop putting chemicals on in your body. You'll start to see a difference and you'll get healthy. We have to combat against what they're dumping on us just by eating better and choosing better lifestyles. I'm not saying, work out 24/7, because you can still have a heart attack, but, just be aware of what you're putting in your body, because we're already fighting against the things that they're dumping on us as well,
That's true. That's true. I want to thank everybody for coming tonight. I want to thank our mods, and thank you, Raven, for a good show.
Yeah.
Join us December 16th. Next week, we will discuss the Denver airport. Some conspirators claim that the Denver International Airport is a secret compound by the Illuminati, the NWO, and that the murals, sculptures, and other engravings to be secret code or maybe an alien language. Thank you, everybody, for coming tonight.
Yeah, and I just want to say one more thing before we leave. As a society, or actually as humankind as a whole, it's our responsibility to become aware of what's going on all around us and to awake others to the dangers that could be pending. And there's just too many people that are apathetic and, depend on somebody else to take care of them.
Right.
But if everybody is apathetic, then no one's going to take care of you or save you from these dangers. So that's kind of like why we were just talking about it tonight. But we're not here to tell anybody what to do. We're just kind of saying
it's like I said
out.
before, as an American citizen, you have the right and responsibility to know what is going on in your country and maybe even in your own backyard.
Right. Well, thank you everybody for coming, and this is probably one of the most serious shows we've ever had. So, and hopefully you guys will join us next week, and everybody have a great, safe weekend or week. I feel like it's the weekend,
it's
but
only
it's not.
Tuesday.
I wish it was Friday.
Thank you for coming. Good night, everybody.